This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now.
Okay, we're going. Welcome to the Wedge Lab podcast. I'm your host, John Edwards. Today we're doing a Park Board episode. 2 Park Board candidates. Becky Alper is running for District 3, is that right?
That's right.
And Tom Olsen is running for Park Board at large in Minneapolis, which means everyone in the city gets to vote for Tom, and only people in District 3 vote for Becky. And you're both running for the DFL endorsement, is that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
Let's start with an icebreaker.
Great.
Becky, what's your favorite park?
My favorite park, I have to say, is the one closest and nearest and dearest to where I live, which is Matthews Park, which is only
What do you do when you go there?
Well, I spend a lot of time supervising children on the playgrounds.
Okay.
Or sometimes I also go down the slides, which is fun. They've got a great place for flying kites or going sledding in the winter. Really like sledding, and I've gone cross-country skiing a couple times there. It's just nice to have a place that's nearby where you can get outside, enjoy nature. And that's what I love about Minneapolis parks, that so many people have a park that's so close to where they live. And that's not true in other cities.
Right. Tom, what is your favorite park?
I think it probably changes on my mood, but the one I use the most is Painter Park, which I use that one a lot because I play a lot of basketball there, and that's kind of where folks in the kind of south uptownish area go to play basketball. It's really flawed though. Like it's right on Lindale, so it's loud and noisy, and there's no fence, so like people will be running into the streets all the time. So I kind of credit it with getting me to think more about parks. Everyone has their favorite park, but they also have their favorite park issue, right? They have their own personal little thing that's been a thorn in their side. And, that's kind of what got me thinking about running in the first place, for sure.
So retrieving basketballs from the street, is that what you're talking about? You said
Yeah.
people were running into the street. Is that what's happening?
Well, and just the process. Oh, yeah, all the time. Yeah, and I'm particularly bad, so my shots will go in the street all the time. Yeah, it's not great.
Yeah.
There's
You're
no
laying bricks and they're just careening into the street, into parked cars. If you had a dent in your car near Painter Park, it was probably one of Tom's bricks.
I cannot comment on that.
Okay. I'm going to try to alternate some of these so that neither one of you gets an unfair advantage. I know that's how a real candidate forum would operate, but this is not a real candidate forum. So you're going to have to hold me to that.
And we're also not running against each other. So.
Yeah, it's good that you're not competitors, but still, we don't want one of you getting an unfair advantage. Some of these questions are going to be tough.
Basketball, though, against me.
So, have either of you watched an entire 8-hour Park Board meeting? You can be honest. I don't think anyone has.
No.
Okay.
No.
It's rough.
8 hours is much.
It's rough. And I don't know why anyone would want to run for Park Board. I've watched pieces of Park Board meetings. It looks painful. So why, Tom, why would you want to do this to yourself?
Well, because, there are a lot of things that I really believe in and a lot of things I want to do for our parks. And specifically about, process and watching meetings on that portion of it. I work at the House DFL doing communications there. I watch 8-hour sessions, and that can be just as painful, listening to Minority Leader Doubt kind of go on and on tangents. We're all here because we love local politics, because we understand that local politics is where we can really affect kind of our day-to-day life. And so I think, it's interesting on some level. I'm used to it. And as far as things I want to accomplish, I really think that the parkways being open to pedestrians during COVID was just an absolutely kind of eye opener at how valuable that space was for us. I mentioned basketball before, but also I think we need more skate parks. We need more soccer fields. We need to adjust, what our parks are for and who they're designed for as our demographics and city change. Um, and yeah, and that kind of goes hand in hand with golf courses and things like that. So, I mean, there's just so much I want to do, and I'm used to the process, and, we love Minneapolis. That's why.
Okay, Becky, this is kind of a why are you running style question, but it's also like, why would you disrupt your life? I'm assuming you like your family and you have hobbies you enjoy. You don't have to be doing this. Why are you running for park board?
Yeah. Yeah. I think last year with the pandemic, with George Floyd's murder, with school, especially for my then kindergartner who was at home, the parks were really a refuge and a source of, place to not only keep up my physical health, but also my mental health. And I got involved, like Tom mentioned, the car-free parkways, and I got involved with that effort too. And I think that I sort of looked at my life and I thought, what's holding me back? Nothing. And I think I've looked around and there are very few women with small kids in politics. And it's just that, just as you mentioned, that it's time away from your family. And right now, my two little kids ran next door to be with the neighbor. So let's see if they come visit this podcast. They might, just FYI, John. But I feel like there's a real opportunity.
We've never had kids on the podcast before.
Oh yeah, I know you've had some pets, so
yeah,
we'll see. We'll see if they visit. I might put myself on mute then. But yeah, I thought what's holding me back, and I want to make a difference in the community, and I see parks as really integral. I think there's a lot that can be done. I know we're going to get into some of those things here with you today. So that's sort of what launched me. But I've been doing things with parks for a while, not just Minneapolis parks, but was involved with the Transit to Green Space program with the Sierra Club, with transit access to parks. So planning different routes, showing people it's possible to do, although quite difficult. So I think there's being part of the park board would enable us as residents to have a greater voice for being able to access our parks in a different way than just driving.
Let's talk about leadership experience. And this doesn't have to be like a job title or anything, but name a time you saw something that needed to be changed and you stepped in to help make that happen. And I don't know if are we going to Becky this time?
Yeah, we can do reverse it. Yeah.
I think we're going back to Becky. I think that's the rules.
Well, I've been in a variety of quote unquote leadership roles before. I've been part of the different professional association boards, been part of a neighborhood association board. So I feel like I have a general idea of how things are run, and certainly have participated in and watched numerous park board meetings. But some of the things I'm most proud of in terms of leadership are some of the things that I've done sort of outside a system. Something I did this spring that I worked on with the Emerson PTA, another board I'm currently part of, but Parent Teacher Association at my daughter's school. We put on an event where we organized a bike giveaway, and we had an amazing number of people who requested bikes. Super exciting. We did a request form in English and in Spanish, and we had to work with a lot of partners. And the hardest part was transporting 77 bicycles from the Free Bikes for Kids warehouse in Brooklyn Center to Minneapolis. We worked with another organization that gives weekend food bags for kids, and they supplied a truck and a driver and it was amazing. So yeah, anyway, that's just an example of something recent.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's great. Like ground level, like creating real change. So good job, Becky. I'm gonna be like Becky's sidekick and cheering her on here.
Thanks, Tom.
Anyway.
Okay, same question to you, Tom.
All right, let's see if I can follow that. Well, so first thing that comes to mind is when I served on the Community Environmental Advisory Commission, so also known as SEAC. It's one of the several commissions that we have here in Minneapolis. So I was the vice chair there one year, and for a few years. And we were kind of looking at improving the actual community representation on the board. It was really full of older white folks, frankly, who were, kind of old school environmentalists. Like certainly their opinion and experiences were important. But for a commission that was called the Community Environmental Advisory Commission, it really felt more like we were the established or like kind of government, expert, super official board. And so what we did so what I did as the vice chair, along with the chair and the staff at the Office of Sustainability, we went through and we reformed our bylaws. It was pretty tough, honestly, to kind of get through that because a lot of folks didn't want to value community expertise or community experience, more activist level stuff, the folks who are on the ground fighting, against Northern Metals, for instance. So yeah, we went through, we changed that. And, I'm happy to say that SEAC is now way more representative of the community. And I think it's actually touching on issues and playing a strong role at influencing, city council members and how they look at things. One thing that we focused a lot on in my kind of final years, and they have continued this effort, is the East Phillips roof depot issue, which is like pretty controversial, as a lot of folks may know who are listening to this. But at the end of the day, it's an environmental justice issue. It's an issue of putting more burden on a community that has been overburdened. And so, I think that our changing the, representation on that board had at least some impact. So proud of that. That's kind of something that I like to point to.
Okay. Maybe you both read this story recently about Minneapolis falling from 1 to 3 in a ranking of urban park systems, which is a ranking based on how many residents live within a 10-minute walk of a park. And here's a quote from the Star Tribune story. Minority neighborhoods have access to 58% less park space per capita than white neighborhoods in Minneapolis, a larger disparity than the national gap of 44%. In St. Paul, which is the number one city now. DC is number one. St. Paul is number 2. In St. Paul, people of color have 30% less park space than their white counterparts. So I think we're going to Tom now. What do we do to fix that in terms of the ranking in general about how many people have access to a park within 10-minute walk, and the question of people of color, communities of color, having the same access to park space as white people do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of the things is that we don't allow a lot of density around neighborhoods that have parks. You look at some of our most beloved and, pointed to parks as some of the, best example of, our city of lakes. You look at the chain of lakes, right? And what do you have there? You have single family housing mostly, controlled by incredibly wealthy folks who are, adverse to, creating more density throughout our city, and especially at parks. So I think that's, one thing. It's not exactly something that the park board can affect directly, but it is something that we play a role in as far as the planning commission, as far as, having a voice and an influence. One thing the park board did, and, this is because we elected folks who were, fairly progressive, fairly urbanist in these last 4 years, was, it played a big role in helping lift up the 2040 plan. And, that's not something that we, if there's opposition coming from the park board, maybe that plan isn't something, there's not as much upzoning as we saw. So that's maybe, number one thing, create more affordability around the neighborhoods that have our parks. Um, to a lesser extent, certainly creating more parks. That's not always an opportunity that we can, point to. So I would say number one answer is, density in our most dense areas with parks.
Okay, Becky, do you have any ideas for how we increase access to people who want to live near park space?
Yeah, well, I would say ditto to how Tom responded about increasing affordable housing near our parks. I'd also add, I know that the park board has a system of making investments that I might get the name wrong, but the idea still holds of racial equity matrix, trying to keep kind of the human element out of how infrastructure decisions are made. So, I support that, looking at the data of who lives where and continuing to prioritize our investments in with underrepresented communities. So I think that would be another way in which we could get at some of those disparities. But I mean, also you look at some of the parks that are, even in District 3, you look at parks, set aside Powderhorn Park, but look at other parks within Ventura Village or Phillips, and they're pretty small. So, I think some of the things that we could concentrate on is just ensuring that those areas where we don't have as much park land, we still have all the boulevards, and focusing on making sure that there's green space within our neighborhoods, that the tree cover is prioritized there, to me seems like another aspect of things that I know the park board is already aware of, but we could double down our efforts on.
Well, and to piggyback off of that, Becky, actually, so I think you may have posted it on Twitter. You posted this really interesting image or article about when you take a street and you kind of, make it into a dead end, and you put like little playgrounds or small park space and kind of micro space. That's something that we should explore, as we're moving away from being a car-centered society. Why do we need, I think everyone would love to have a park in the middle of their road. They can still get out, they can still access, but then having this great little neighborhood space that you could, look out and watch your kids play, I think that'd be fantastic. And that's something that maybe we should look into, and really explore as we get in there.
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up. And can I just add that there's a concept out there that I learned of recently about the South Side or North Side Greenway. So you create this whole corridor, and I believe it's been adopted in the Transportation Action Plan with the city. But there are different ways that could look. But one way is just complete park, and that it would stretch all across, connecting downtown all the way to the border with Richfield. Yeah. So it would take that park in the middle of the street, but then take it and make it a corridor park, which is something we don't have right now.
Do you think we're doing a good job with boulevard trees? I know the park board is in control of that. Do you think are we taking care of our boulevard trees? Are we planting enough of them? Is there money in the budget to plant more? Are we doing a good job in that way? I don't know who we're going to, so this is a jump ball. I guess, Tom, you go first.
Yeah, well, so I think actually the park board has done a fairly good job on this. Our arborists, our experts, our forestry experts have done a fairly good job on the boulevards. A lot of it, where we're seeing that we don't have enough canopy is kind of a waiting game. We were struck by the tornado up in north, and then struck by pest and disease. And that was certainly bad. That being said, I mean, absolutely we can do more. One thing that I'm really interested in pursuing to increase resiliency within our city, and to increase the tree diversity, is to allow fruiting trees on our boulevards. That's something that's not currently allowed. If we could have fruit-bearing trees in the future, that would allow a more diverse tree set, and that would allow us to, folks have access to food and things like that.
Why are
And
fruit bearing trees not allowed in the boulevard?
yeah, well, so they're concerned about the fruit of there'd be it get on the ground and it would be a mess to clean up, things like that. Which I mean, I don't know. I feel like our trees have lots of seeds.
Like with mulberries.
Yeah, something like that.
Like with mulberries, I get mulberries on my shoes all the time, and then you track them in.
But mulberries are so good.
They are. I will take the mulberries on my shoes. I think it's a worthy trade off. They taste good. I eat
Yeah.
street mulberries all the time. Tom, were you finished with your answer? I'm sorry for.
Yeah, no, I mean mostly finished. I think it's a worthy trade-off, and as soon as the trees start to bear fruit, we could definitely have programs around that. That would be so fun. Go pick fruit with your kid. And I would also just lastly like to say that one area that we really need a lot of help is planting more trees on rental properties. This is something where it's obviously not under our direct jurisdiction, so it's kind of where our city is falling back. But I think it's something that we can influence and we can push for. And we need to make sure that every house, every neighborhood is getting those in their yards. So now I'm done.
Okay, Becky, trees, go.
Trees. Yeah. I think we're doing a pretty good job with certain trends that are working against us, frankly, like you mentioned, pests, Tom. I mean, I think that's a really big deal. And that's going to impact a lot of our boulevard trees, and it has, with the emerald ash borer. But I think we owe it to our residents. You look down from an airplane at our city in the summer, and it's like all trees. And I know people who have visited from out of town are just so surprised that we would have such a green city. So I think putting more resources there, it makes sense, because it makes such a big difference too in terms of. I just saw an article recently. Of course, I can't place it right now, but not only for our health, but also for the heat island effect of heat bubbles. So it can lower the temperature drastically, the local temperature drastically. So I mean that's a big deal. You used to talk about renters, and I think that's so important. So I'd like to see more of that. And fruit trees, there's this fabulous fruit tree. I'm not going to tell you where it is. It's on the Greenway. It's a cherry tree. And last summer, I picked cherries from this cherry tree and made at least 3 cherry pies, and it was great. So yeah, I'm pro. Maybe they just need to be adapted by booster clubs to take away some of the issues associated with the fruit.
Whose cherries were they?
Whose cherries?
Stole from the city.
I think they were on the Greenway. So Hennepin County's cherries.
Cool. Okay. I apologize for engaging in so much conversation with this terrible lag. It's putting you both in awkward positions. I know you're both running on pretty aggressive, like open the parkways up to people platforms, which could potentially be controversial. It could get you in trouble with some people, but I appreciate it. One thing I discovered last summer during the pandemic was how quiet some of the parks can be if you like say, okay, we're going to limit the number of cars that can be out here. Really, like I say this all the time about climate change, like the way to convince people to like decar our city and prioritize people is to make the livability argument, not necessarily the save the planet argument, even though that's the more important one. Like you'll be able to enjoy your neighborhood a whole lot more if you don't have a big freeway in the form of Lyndale Avenue or Hennepin Avenue coming through it. Slow that down, limit the number of cars that are coming through. So I guess I started with parkways. Becky, tell us a little bit about why you think opening the parkways up to people and limiting car access in some cases is a good idea.
We have so much pavement in our city dedicated to people in cars and to big cars, really big cars. People drive huge cars these days. And so the parkways were these safe havens last summer. And I was able to bicycle with my 4-year-old who was, let's see, so she was 3 then. She was on this little scoot bike. And then my 83-year-old father who still bikes. And we were all able to go together. And it was a beautiful thing. And we were able to, like you said, enjoy the quiet, feel safe. It was a wonderful experience. And that's something that I want others to experience as well, that joyful feeling. So when I talk to people about this concept, there were, I think there are a lot of things that can still be worked out with it on a longer term basis. But in terms of doing ongoing evaluation of who's using the parks, who did it attract new users? Did it change people's behavior? And anecdotally, I think it did, but we just don't have the data from last summer to be able to say for sure. So I think we should do it again, and we should be more intentional about it and how we engage people in these projects. I'm not saying that it makes sense to do it everywhere. We need to maintain access to people's, people live along these parkways, and some of them have, that's their only driveway access, their only way to get to the road network. But certainly I do think it was great, and I would love to see more of this happen in the future.
Yeah, and Tom, I think even if you're a car enthusiast, if you like parks and you want to enjoy a park, you don't go to a park to like experience the car traffic, right? Like this could be a
Yeah.
good thing for everyone if we put a little bit of thought into it.
Yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree. I mean, what Becky said, I really think it actually helps increase accessibility to our parks. It allows people to enjoy these spaces at their own pace. You're not having to worry about something that could potentially, ruin your life, if things go wrong. I think we saw that it was along Cedar Avenue around Nokomis, I believe, that there was, a biker got hit. And that's because of the confusion at the intersection with one of our parkways and city roads. And so that's something to definitely consider. There's some folks who, they say that the only way that some folks, like people with disabilities, can interact with our parks is by driving through them. And I don't really accept that premise. I think that something that's really limiting access to our parks for folks is that we don't have, transit that goes up to it. We don't have metro mobility stations. We don't have spots where people can reliably, get to and fro if they have a disability. You shouldn't have to own a car to be able to get there if you have a disability. And I think that's something that, statistically as well, people with disabilities are less likely to have vehicles. So that's, I'm just bringing that up because whenever I, have had people push back against me on this issue, that's what they bring up for first and foremost. They say that it's reducing access. And I really just think it's completely the opposite because, another aspect of this is, the least we could do is keep the roads as they are and open it up to pedestrians and bikes. The next best thing we could do, we could turn this into green space. We could turn it into areas, picnic areas. We could turn it into disability accessible bathrooms, which is a huge thing for folks. A lot of people, they can't make it around the entire lake or the entire, wherever without needing to use the restroom. And that's something that, I think, as a very, able-bodied person, and, a lot of our parks are kind of, just defaulted for someone who is capable of doing all these things. And so we need to increase the, that consideration. So yeah, livability, it's, and I, we, we need to absolutely open these parkways to people and then allow more density around it as well. So it's not just enjoyed by, the people who are living right next to it, because that's also another issue, right? We don't want to just do this and then just, really boost property values and then make it so that people can have, more dictation over what happens there. So there's stuff to consider. There's stuff to iron out, as Becky said, specific stats. How do we get people to engage? But at the base level, these parkways are not critical arteries for travel, and they shouldn't be. And that's kind of the premise I'm working off of.
So here's something from Tom's website. Becky, you're off the hook with this one because Tom is making a vicious attack on baseball. And I've been to some community advisory committee meetings where the baseball people are some of the most intense people you will meet, giving their input on parks. And here's what Tom says on his website. As commissioner, I will pursue the conversion of our underutilized baseball fields into well-maintained soccer fields, skate parks, and basketball courts. Now, I'm a basketball fan. I appreciate that, but the baseball people are not going to be happy. What do you have to say to those people?
Mm-mm. Yeah, well, what I have to say is that our parks are about balance and finding what's right for the communities that they serve. And right now, our parks are imbalanced. We are giving over space that is, frankly, it's underutilized. And for skateboarders, I see people playing soccer on more of our baseball fields than not. I will also say it's not just against baseball. Obviously we need to have high quality baseball fields. Like we need to, and I think it's good if we concentrate it and we have little leagues there and we have, youth leagues. That's great. And like, we should definitely embrace that. But it's really overabundant. One thing that when I started running, I was kind of looking at each park from Google Maps, from Google Earth, and it really becomes apparent there, along with how much space our golf courses take up. And so that's kind of another aspect. At the end of the day, our city has gained 50,000 people in the last 10 years. I don't know the exact number. So we are growing, we're getting more dense. And so you really have to look at, what is the most, park use per capita that we're going to get out of this thing. And I see that these, other things are anecdotally being used a lot more. And I just want to pursue that. And I also think it's something that, there's been a history of, racism around basketball, around skate parks, and like just anti-youth and things like that. And it hasn't gone away, So again, I'm going to bring up Painter Park. So there was a plan at Painter Park to allow for a second basketball court there, which is great. I was just there. There were 14 people, playing or waiting to use the court, next to a tennis court, which, was used by a couple people, but certainly just not to the same extent. And, at one of the meetings to allow another baseball or another basketball court, someone literally testified that there's not enough police presence to allow for that second court. And that's just something we have to deal with.
I remember that.
Yeah, it's gross. And, I wrote in, I called in, I spoke on that issue, and it was unfortunate. The commissioner who, I don't want to say names, but they said that they were totally in support of the basketball court, and they're absolutely, here to kind of reform some of this racist past. And then they voted to keep the tennis court. And it's just, I just think we need to go in there and we need to rebalance. And I have nothing, we are going to, as your commissioner, I'm going to make sure that we have beautiful, thriving baseball leagues and baseball fields, and that people who want to use it will have access. But right now, people are being denied access to other sports, and we need to rebalance that.
So the thing about the basketball courts at Painter Park is I was reading through the written comments, and the person who said we don't have enough police to do full court basketball was Tom Lydon of Fox 9, which
that's right,
blew my mind. Like he's covering police politics occasionally and is making comments like we don't have enough police to do. But essentially, we don't have enough police to have full court basketball. Very weird comment, Becky.
Yeah, it's
we covered a lot of ground there, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on baseball, basketball, the allocation of space, we could move on to a different question for you. I don't know if you want to pick a fight with baseball fans at this point.
No, I don't want to. You talk to me about garden plots.
Okay, we can move on.
Yeah.
I have some quotes from your websites, and I'm going to ask you what they mean. I'm genuinely curious. These are not gotcha questions like the baseball question. So, Becky, on your website, you say, I support greater emphasis on cost-effective pilot projects with evaluation and engagement built into the process, as opposed to classic waterfall style projects that engage first and build years later. So, two things. Kind of talk about what you mean there, and maybe an example of some things you'd like to see piloted.
Yeah. So I think the thing that comes most to mind with me for this is the way we build transportation projects, and where we do a lot of engagement. I work in the transportation sector, and we talk about it for years, and then we go build. And then we're done, So I really like the idea of doing low cost pilots. So maybe it's a bump out right next to a park, for example, or maybe in the case of last summer, it's how we did the closing the parkways. I would call that a pilot because it wasn't a permanent structure. None of the barriers were permanent. So, but the issue that I had with how it rolled out last year is that we didn't hear from anybody about what they thought, and we don't have anything documented. So I think that's really key to informing the next phase, which maybe is putting it in concrete or whatever. The bump out, maybe it's with bollards first, and then you build it out in a more permanent fashion. So I guess that's what I mean by that. That would be an example, but you could do that in any sort of arena within the park. You could pilot a certain type of new programming. Maybe it's swim lessons. Maybe it's some sort of youth activity, and you try it out. You intentionally build in some surveying, some evaluation, and then you decide to roll it out in a more, if it goes well, you adapt it, and then you roll it out in a more permanent way. So I'm pro not waiting years and years. Which often, frankly, is how long things take to get carried out, at least, definitely in transportation, but in other arenas as well.
Yeah, speaking of engagement, like one of the problems I noticed with park board engagement when they were talking about the Southwest Parks master plan was how many people show up who just live next to parks, and their concerns are very like, I would prefer that people not use the park that's in my backyard. You wouldn't think park board politics would be extremely NIMBY in the way that like planning and development politics is, but it's almost like just as bad. And so the engagement process can be dominated by people who don't want people walking through their quote unquote backyard because it's their backyard park. I don't know. Becky, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it gets back to who can live near parks. The people who can live near parks typically have a front and a backyard plus the park. And we need to work harder at engaging people who don't live right next to the parks. And I think that's going to be an ongoing thing. I don't think you ever perfect engagement. You learn from how you did it last time, and you try something new. Yeah. And
it's very imperfect. Tom?
Yeah, no, I think this is, reforming this process is incredibly important. On one hand, I think we need to invest actual time and money into reaching folks who are unengaged. They don't have the privilege or the time or what have you to be engaged. And another thing that I think is important is to recognize when sometimes something is just good and we should just do it. And at the end of the day, I think it's something that we have to kind of move more towards. We're almost process obsessed in some ways. One example that I looked to that really inspired me was the super block development in Barcelona. So they started off, they had one where they were really engaged and they said, okay, we're going to kind of cut off these roads and create an interior, blah, blah, blah. And it's going to be a public space, but it's still going to be open. And so they had one process like that. And they kind of went through and they saw it and it was successful. And then they had another super block, which they just, by the way, I feel like I should explain it. So Barcelona is made up in all these different squares, and they have roads that they were really car dominated, and they have all these roads. So super blocks, they basically did what we want to do with our parkways, is they shut them down to car traffic, except for to folks who live there, and they created a lot of new green and community space. And so one of these super blocks, they just went in and did it. So people kind of woke up the next day, and all of a sudden they had this new space. And there was a time where they weren't kind of sure how to use this space or like what's going on. And so there's a little bit of confusion we want to avoid there. But at the end of the day, after a few weeks and months, they embraced it completely because it's a good, smart idea. And I don't think that we need to let folks kind of stick, a stick in the spokes of our good idea progress all the time. So, that's going to ruffle some people's feathers. We have to find out when there's truly stuff that is just a great thing that we need to implement. But that's something where I want to look at reforming for sure.
And Becky, I apologize for interrupting you. The lag is so bad that I interrupted you and then it didn't happen for another 10 seconds. So I don't know if there was
No problem. No problem.
thoughts that I cut you off from making.
No, nothing worth repeating or going back to. I can't remember right now.
Okay. Let's talk about encampments, unsheltered people in the parks. Becky, can you say that the park board maybe did anything that you would do differently handling that going forward?
Yeah. Looking back at last year,
2020, I mean.
Yeah. Right. Looking back at last year, I think the park board was in, we were all in a different place than we are now. And I think it's really important to recognize that. I was just looking at some of the news from last year, and, 1 year ago, it was a completely different environment than, now we're sort of, I feel like, have a different mindset. At least I certainly do. But a year ago, we were in the midst of a pandemic. It was a really hard summer, and I think they didn't have a lot of options. And I think they took the best path forward that they could. And looking ahead to 2021 and beyond, people have always lived in our parks, and they will continue to live in our parks. And I think, my opinion, it's our role as the park board to try to proactively manage that, but we're not going to solve it. We're not going to solve homelessness. So I really see the role of the park board as working with partners at different government levels who really focus on this as part of their core mission to try to come together to offer support. And I guess I would say continually ongoing management of the situation. I know the park board has developed an unsheltered people policy, and I see that as a way going forward. I don't support having police kick people out of parks unless they're extenuating circumstances. I think it's just so crucial for stability if we want people to get help, that we don't keep moving them around, that we don't put our money towards fences. I think we need to focus more on offering people the opportunity to, at least live with some dignity, bathrooms, needle disposal, things like that, harm reduction strategies, while we work with our partners to try and find more long-term solutions.
Tom?
Huge question, right? This is a national issue. It's something that not one organization, one government body is responsible for, but it's also it's so big that one group is not going to be able to solve it. So we all have a role in it, right? It's something that we all have to play a part in. One thing, again, so at the House CFL, I work with Rep Aisha Gomez, who basically through her advocacy over last summer got a new committee created, the Preventing Homelessness Division. And so I've been watching over this last session a lot of that testimony from people who are currently unhoused, people who experienced homelessness at some point in their life, and various experts. And one of the biggest things that I learned from them is that, at the end of the day, if we don't kind of meet this issue head on, we end up costing our, society, both morally and economically, way more. And one thing that, a surefire way to ensure that someone is going to continue to be unhoused, to, kind of be set further back on their personal journey towards finding a permanent solution that works for them, is to create instability in their life. So when you ask, is there something that I would have done differently? It's hard to say, being in the situation, but hindsight 2020, I think, destruction of property and, violent evictions is something that, while it may, for some people, feel like it's a necessary thing to clean up our parks and, get people kind of moving to get on their way, it's just going to cost us in the end more. And so that's something, if I was completely had 100% vision of what to do, I would try to avoid. There was stuff around like contracting, with certain folks who wouldn't dispose of, or who wouldn't remove of the encampment in like a humane way, and so it ended up in destruction, and so that's just not great. So going into this, I think it's something, Becky said, harm reduction, be proactive, work with our partners. We have to keep the pressure up on the county. They're getting about $200 million from the federal, Recovery Act from Biden. So is the city. Governor Walz is getting around $500 million that he can put towards homelessness. It sounds like he has enough to do what he wants to do, and that his whatever his office wants to do to help our situation throughout our state. So I'm optimistic, but really it's going to require a lot of pressure. And so what I would see as part of my role as an at-large commissioner is keeping up that pressure on our partners. We have to keep our pressure on the county and say, you need to come in, you have the resources, you have the expertise, you have the money, please step in and do this. Because it was really, people were just kicking the can around and it fell on the park board. And the park board is made up of a lot of caring people who wanted to do what was best. And they just didn't, they were in a battle that they couldn't win. So that's kind of a bit of my philosophy. We could have a whole podcast on this, I think, but
we won't, Tom. We won't be doing that. We're not going to be coming back for another whole podcast with you. That's not happening.
That's all right. I understand why. But it's, so basically I just want to make sure that we are creating stability in people's lives so that they can find the solution that works for them.
Okay, Becky, back to you. We're going to give you a police question first. You're getting all the good ones first. You can thank me afterwards.
Yeah.
So the park board has a police department. I forget how many officers there are. It's a very small police department, right? A few dozen.
Very
Is
small.
that right?
Like 38.
Tom guessed 38. I'm guessing Tom is correct, right?
Oh, I was going to guess 33.
Should the park board have a police department? And if so, what does that look like in your mind?
Yeah, so right now the police portion of the amount of the budget that the park police form is really small. It's a small portion of the overall budget. I mean, I think it's something that's worth examining. It's also worth noting that if the park police don't exist, my understanding is that the Minneapolis Police Department would be called in for the calls that the park police currently receive. So I think this is something that needs to be handled with a lot of care and be really intentional about. I know that the park board last summer voted on a resolution to kind of think more about this, the future of the police force and how it could look, if it could be unarmed ambassadors, what if they didn't have a police force at all? What if it was a peace force? So, but it failed. This resolution failed, so they have not looked into that more. And I see that as a way, a potential path forward. I think we also have to ask the community what they would like to see as part of this, these next steps. So I think there's work to be done there, but I also think that it's worth treading cautiously, because there's some real consequences that could happen if we take a potential step that goes awry.
Okay, Tom, same question.
Yeah, I think, the phrase that that comes to mind, or that I have been saying to myself over and over again is, as the Minneapolis Police Department goes, so too, in a lot of ways, does the Minneapolis Park Police go. Because as Becky said, if we get rid of our park police, then all of a sudden we have Minneapolis PD responding to dispatch calls. And at this point, I think that's not something that is effective. That's not something that most of the community wants. And personally, as a commissioner, I would rather work with, be able to, have some modicum of control over how folks respond in our police department, rather than having to go through, whatever, the process is going to be in 2022. And so I think, yeah, so a lot depends what happens in November with these resolutions. And, we'll start there. But in an ideal world, I think if, the Minneapolis Police Department wasn't incredibly mistrusted and incredibly dangerous to a lot of people's well-beings, then no, the park board would not need a police department. Before the Great Recession, the Park Police Act, or the Park Board, had folks who would be seasonal, part-time. They would go to parks and they would de-escalate situations without being armed. They were kind of, ambassadors, as Becky said. And, because our parks we live in a really segregated city, and people of all different cultures and backgrounds come to our parks, and sometimes that can create tension, but I don't think you need a gun, and I don't think you need a uniform, and I don't think you need militarization to respond to that. So I think that's something I do want to pursue, but as it's almost a devil versus the devil you don't sort of thing. So I want to make sure we're stepping carefully, but I want to explore it for sure. That resolution that Becky talked about, which would even just allow us to explore the situation in the first place, that's absolutely step one, and I think that's the smallest first step that we can take for sure.
Okay, Becky, I've been violating my rule when I said I was going to alternate in that way before. So, and I feel bad for giving you those tough ones first. So I'm going to go to you first with the drinking alcohol in the parks question. Should people be allowed to drink alcohol openly in the parks?
Wait, back to me?
Oh yeah, we're back to you.
Thanks, John. Oh, I'm going to use my deferring to staff on that one. No, as my part of my studying this weekend.
You get one. You get to play that card one time.
Where's my card? Yeah. I think it's worth looking at who is it harming. Is it preventing people from enjoying the parks? That is the question that I would begin to look at as I would explore the situation. Talk to staff, talk to the community. I would like to know more about that topic before I put that as part of my platform.
Okay. I'm not bothered by the current ban because I don't drink alcohol, but seems to me it would be okay to let people drink in a park as they might do in their own backyard. Because I live in an apartment and I don't have a backyard, so I think a lot about how the parks are my backyard. It's where I go to gather with people. It's where people will have parties if they don't have their own backyard. And Tom, I got this idea from your website, so I know you're for it. So talk a little bit about why you're for this.
Yeah, well, so I'm for it for a number of different reasons. Number one reason is because I think that it's something that people already engage in. It's something that I would rather have that is out in the open and known, because I think that is something that, mature cities can, and mature adults can engage in a healthy and safe way. You look at cities like Charleston, New Orleans, Paris, for example. They have very open liquor laws, and some have certain districts, certain times of day, and it works really well. It creates just a nice cultural atmosphere. It creates a atmosphere that can be a boost for business and tourism, which I think is something that, if we're looking for uh, you know getting people to come and engage in our parks and our city, that's certainly an option to look at. And because it's kind of a subjective enforcement measure, right? People do it. Police might not target one person, they might target another person. It's kind of like spitting or loitering laws in a way. And so I would rather enforce behavior that is kind of objective, that is like, okay, you are violating someone else's freedom right now. Like, you are stepping into someone's personal space, you are causing harm objectively, rather than, okay, well, you've got some drinks out and I don't like the look of you, so I'm going to come over and stop you. So those are just some reasons. And, as far as starting it, I do think that we could start off with an ordinance that would be, park wide, citywide, where, it'd be something like, you can't have a glass container, and it's, between 12 and 10 or something like that. But ultimately, we'll probably start out small, right? It'll probably be something like, I'll say it because it's my name, Thomas Beach at Pade between Saturdays and Sundays from 10 to 8. Like, it is completely open. And then we just kind of see, we test the waters. Ultimately, I would like to actually have like the city council create an ordinance. This is something that a lot of cities do. They do it successfully. And I think it could be a nice addition for sure.
Becky, this was the perfect opportunity for you to bust out your pilot project idea. Tom took your pilot project idea. He stole it from me.
He did. Way to go. I love it.
So are either of you hearing a lot about pesticides? I know this is like when you're campaigning, talking to voters. Are you hearing a lot about that? I know occasionally I watch park board meetings and there's a contingent of people who are very exercised about pesticides for good reason. But it's not an issue I'm intimately familiar with. But I thought I would ask the question and see. Let's go to you first, Tom. If you have thoughts on pesticides and their use in our parks.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's definitely, that is a contingent, as I've been speaking with people, that is definitely a strong, group of advocates who are reaching out about that. And where I stand on pesticides is that, we should absolutely limit them as much as possible. We are causing incredible death, like genocidal death against our insect population. And a lot of that is pesticide use. A lot of it is pesticide use, in our rural areas and our farms. And that's stuff that, we can't control the park board, but, within our area, absolutely. I think the big thing that people think about is, mosquitoes, but they're actually, in preventing mosquitoes, but they're actually natural ways. There are natural biological substances and uses that we can engage to reduce that population. We already do that, and it's effective. So, I don't think we need to go in and start spraying. And I'll just kind of a little bit on herbicides is another issue. I think this is kind of where we need to reduce grass turf and reduce, golf courses, because those take a ton of herbicides and those pollute our waters, and water is incredibly precious, and it's become more so as the years go on here. But I don't support, I guess, a ban on herbicides just because there are invasive species that we kind of need them to take care of it efficiently. But you can use it really judiciously so that it is not causing permanent harm to the environment. So, that's where I stand. I have an environmental background. I have a degree in environmental studies. Again, I served on SEAC. I worked for the Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy. I'm very sympathetic to these folks, and I'm happy to look at it in a smart way here for sure.
Becky, pesticide question goes to you now. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I was just thinking that I have had very few comments from people about that. People seem to be way more interested in talking about homelessness and police and parkways. So parkways, particularly coming from folks who are really concerned about access to parks, people with disabilities. So I haven't had a lot of discussions around herbicides and pesticides, and that's something as a gardener, I am interested in learning more about. Yeah.
So let's go back to Becky one more time. I think we're coming to the end. We've been doing this an hour. It's a beautiful day. We should all be finished and go back outside. Go enjoy a park. Is there anything I haven't covered, Becky, that you want to make sure people know you care about and you're going to advocate for if you're elected to the park board representing District 3?
Yeah. Great question. I think what I want people to know is that I'm committed to doing the job day in and day out. I know that it's really frequent to get agenda packets that have upwards of 350 pages. And I pledge as park board commissioner to read every single one, to be there for, and I know we didn't really talk about this, but I think it's really important. Even, I have certain ideas and beliefs and passion, things I'm passionate about in terms of parks, and others that I'm still learning more about. But I think the thing that I want viewers who are District 3 constituents to know is that you can count on me being responsive, willing to talk about it, to hear their sides of the story, and to be responsive.
And District 3 is basically what neighborhoods? Can you let people know? Because maybe people don't realize.
Yeah, Cedar Riverside, Seward, parts of Longfellow and Powderhorn, Phillips, Ventura Village. So basically 35W east to the river, south to approximately 36th Street.
Okay, I'm just realizing that potentially could have been a gotcha question. What if you didn't know, but you knew?
Yes.
I can't do that with Tom because he's running at large. You're running to represent the whole city. So, Tom, what have we not covered? This is your closing statement, I guess. What do you want people to know?
Yeah, I mean, I think, Becky covered a bit. I think people should know how incredibly important the park board is. It's got a budget of over $100 million. It's, around, high 20s, 28-ish% of the land in our city. And, it's something that deserves the full attention of the commissioner that you are electing to be there. It's just as important as many other elected positions, I would say. And kind of that being said, I know one park issue that kind of came up in these last 4 years was voting to increase the salary of park commissioners. They were about to do it to around 40,000, and it got political and folks voted against it. That's something that I think I'm absolutely for because I come from a place, I have a lot of privilege, I have a lot of ability to do this in my free time as a part-time commissioner, but I think it should absolutely be something that people can do full time as their career. That's one thing, Commissioner Chris Meyer, he puts in over 40 hours a week into this. And, if you calculate that out with the current $12,000 salary, he's making like not much, way below minimum wage. And so what I think that results in commissioners who just have to be incredibly passionate. And sometimes we get folks in there who aren't. And sometimes that kind of leads to disengagement. It leads to it can help lead to contribute to some of these 8-hour meetings and things we've seen. So, as a commissioner, I'm committed to, giving in, putting in the time and the effort and, what it requires and what it deserves. But I'm also committed to reforming the park board so that someone who doesn't have all the privilege that I have can come in and do this full time, because I think we absolutely need to open this up to more people for sure.
Okay, he's raised another question, Becky, with his closing statement, which means I have to open this back up. The salary issue. Would you
Sorry.
support raising the salary of park commissioners?
Yeah, I would. And I think having now gone through a month and a half of campaigning, this is my first time getting involved in local politics in this way, and wow, is it a lot of work. And I believe you have to have a slight bit of craziness to sign yourself up for this. I mean, because it requires a lot of you, and I think it's hard for. I consider myself tremendously lucky to be in a position where I can go for it, but for others, I think it's a lot more difficult, and I believe that we have to, if we want to, like Tom said, get a more, well, now hopefully I'm not I'm quoting you correctly, but to have a more diverse set of candidates, to have people from different backgrounds, we really have to pay this the way it deserves to be paid.
Yeah, and just to comment on what Tom said about you're either really passionate, and what I've also noticed, there's a bunch of people who just wanted to be elected to something and don't really put in the effort. So that's a good point. Okay, we're getting to the point. So this is the end of the show. And so I know I promised both of you that I would ask this question, and Becky was like, "What are you going to ask? I need to prepare." I didn't tell her what I was going to ask, but I did say I would ask about giving our audience a recommendation. I know other podcasts do this. Recommend to our audience something, a book, a movie, TV show, something I can't even conceive of that will enrich their lives. Who wants to go first?
Yeah, I think the last truly intelligent full-length book that I read, it was called The Sixth Extinction by Elizabeth Colbert. Maybe said like Colbert, but it's with a K. But it was a great book, and I loved it because it was such an easy read about the 5 previous mass extinctions in our world and how we humans are the cause of what's looking like being a 6th, and how we can prevent the 6th extinction from happening. And it wasn't depressing. It was moderately uplifting, and I would recommend that book.
I mostly read tweets. Okay, Tom, what's your recommendation?
Well, what I'm personally right now engaging in is the Talking Sopranos podcast. If you are a Soprano fan, absolutely should watch it. It's hilarious. It's great. It's insightful. But what I'm going to recommend for like one of my favorite books that I've read recently is The Fifth Season by N.K. Jemisin. I'm a huge sci-fi person, and what N.K. Jemisin did with this book, it's incredible. It's an environmental oriented book set in the future. It has really strong, amazing, characters of color. It's got trans characters. It's just like it's got everything, and it's incredibly powerful. I will say there's a lot of hard stuff that happens in it. There's a lot of tragedy and trauma. So if you are kind of looking for something easy that's light, it might not be for you, but it's truly, I think, one of the best books that has come out in the last few years. It's an instant classic. If you love sci-fi, check it out. It's amazing.
Okay. I think that's it. My guests have been Becky Alper, running for Minneapolis Park Board in District 3, and Tom Olsen, who is running for Minneapolis Park Board at large, which means everyone in the city gets to vote, not just people in District 3. Okay, thank you both for joining us.
Thanks so much, John.
This has been the Wedge Live. And I apologize for the lag. I will edit it together as if we didn't have any lag at all. We're all going to look normal. And I'm your host, John Edwards. I'm John Edwards, your host. Goodbye.
This is a real thing. Real thing.
None of you have the balls to stop this. Stop this.
I've got plenty of time. I have nothing else going on today.
We're in the Wedge neighborhood right now. Right now.